Hello, my name is Sam. Today I'm going to share my secret to speaking English fluently and how to speak English like a native. This is I Went to London, Lesson 38. You can watch all previous videos on my channel in a playlist, I Went to London. I wasn't born speaking English. In fact, I struggled a lot. I remember how nervous I felt just trying to put a sentence together. My grammar was all over the place, my pronunciation was a mess, and sometimes people would even laugh. It was embarrassing. I thought maybe I just wasn't meant to speak English. But I didn't quit. I kept going, little by little, until something changed. And now, I speak fluently, confidently, and without fear. No, I didn't move to an English-speaking country. I didn't have expensive classes. I just had a strong desire to learn, a plan, and a lot of patience. At first, I was completely lost. I didn't know where to start, and I was terrified of making mistakes. I avoided speaking because I didn't want people to judge me. But one day, I told myself, enough is enough. I have to start somewhere. That's when I realized fluency isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Once I stopped trying to be perfect and focused on improving a little every day, everything got easier. The first thing I worked on was listening. Think about it. Babies don't start speaking right away, they listen first, so I did the same. I watched cartoons, listened to songs, and played short videos over and over again. At first it was frustrating because I didn't understand much. But after a while, I started recognizing words and phrases. Reading was another challenge. I remember opening a book and feeling completely overwhelmed by all the words I didn't know. So instead of diving into difficult texts, I started small. I read children's books, short articles, and anything simple that caught my interest. When I found a new word, I wrote it down, looked up the meaning, and tried to use it in a sentence. Speaking, though, that was the hardest part. I was so afraid of saying something wrong that I avoided speaking entirely. But then I realized that mistakes weren't my enemy, they were part of the process. So I started small. I talked to myself in the mirror. I practiced tongue twisters to improve my pronunciation. It felt silly at first, but it worked. One big change for me was learning to sound more natural. At first I spoke like a textbook. My sentences were too formal, too robotic. I noticed that native speakers used contractions, casual expressions, and a natural rhythm that made their speech flow, so I started copying them. Instead of saying, I am going to the market, I'd say, I'm going to go to the market. Instead of, what are you doing? I learned that people say, what you doing? Small changes like that made a huge difference. Asking questions was another struggle. My questions sounded stiff and unnatural. I'd say, what is your name? Instead of, what's your name? So I started paying attention to how people actually spoke in real life. I learned to start conversations with, hey, can I ask you something? And to ask open-ended questions that kept conversations going. One of the hardest parts was understanding native speakers. They spoke too fast, used slang, and I couldn't keep up. But then I realized I didn't need to understand every word, I just needed to catch the key words. If someone said, I'm going to grab a bite and head to the park, I didn't panic. I just recognized grab a bite, which means eat something, and head to the park, which means go to the park. That was enough to understand the main idea. Another game changer? Thinking directly in English. I used to translate everything in my head and it slowed me down. So I started naming objects around me in English, planning my day in English, even reviewing my day in English before going to sleep. Instead of translating, "I am hungry" from my native language, I trained my brain to just think, "I'm hungry," and suddenly speaking became faster and more natural. I also realized that fluent speakers don't just use words, they use phrases. Instead of saying, "I'm very happy," I learned to say, "I'm over the moon." Instead of "I don't know," I started saying, "I have no idea." I picked up these expressions from movies, books, and conversations, and I practiced shadowing, listening to native speakers and repeating their sentences exactly, copying their tone and rhythm. It made my speech sound so much more natural. Remembering vocabulary was tough. I'd learn a word and forget it a few days later. The trick? Learning words in context. Instead of just memorizing fascinating, I learned it in a sentence. The movie was absolutely fascinating. I also made sure to use new words right away. If I learned the word delicious, I'd say, "Ha ha ha, this pasta is delicious," that same day. And grouping words by theme, like food words or travel words, made learning easier. Accents used to confuse me too. American, British, Australian, they all sounded different. But I trained my ear by listening to different accents and paying attention to the words they used. For example, British speakers say flat instead of apartment and lift instead of elevator. Understanding these small differences helped me communicate better with different people. Speaking with strangers in English was terrifying at first. My hands would shake and I'd forget simple words, but I prepared myself by practicing common phrases before conversations. If I was meeting someone new, I'd rehearse saying, "Hi, I'm Emma, it's great to meet you." If I was joining a conversation, I'd practice saying, "That's so interesting. Can you tell me more?" The more I practiced, the less nervous I felt. I also had a bad habit of pausing too much while speaking because I was translating in my head. To fix this, I started using fillers like "well" or "you know" to give myself time to think. And instead of trying to say long, complicated sentences, I focused on starting with a short answer and then adding details. If someone asked, "What did you do today?" I'd start with, "I went shopping and cooked dinner." Later I'd add, "I bought fresh vegetables and tried a new recipe." The biggest lesson I learned? Fluency isn't about knowing every word. It's about confidence, consistency, and real practice. I surrounded myself with English as much as possible. I changed my phone settings to English. I thought in English, and I even tried to dream in English. I found practice partners, joined language exchange groups, and when no one was around, I talked to myself in the mirror. Most importantly, I learned to celebrate my progress. Every time I had a successful conversation, understood a movie without subtitles, or used a new phrase correctly, I reminded myself how far I'd come. Learning English isn't a race, it's a journey. I used to feel stuck and frustrated, but I never gave up. Every mistake I made was a lesson. Every challenge was a chance to improve. Fluency isn't just for a few lucky people. It's for anyone willing to put in the effort. So if you're learning English, believe in yourself. Trust the process. Keep going even when it feels hard. You have everything it takes to speak confidently and express yourself freely. Just keep practicing, keep pushing forward, and never stop learning. You've got this.